If anyone had asked the nurses on duty at Oasis Medical Center, most would have sworn that Nurse Rebecca was the most diligent among them. She had a reputation for working the hardest, always there to volunteer for double shifts, her crisp white uniform almost a second skin. But behind that calm exterior, behind those rimmed glasses and clipped manner, lived something twisted, a hunger for chaos, a quiet delight in sowing confusion and sorrow, so subtle nobody would suspect. It was a rainy night, the kind Lagos had when the clouds gather all day and pour their misery in sheets as if the world was about to be washed clean. But inside the hospital, life was entering the world, one fragile breath at a time. On the second floor, two women screamed almost in unison. Both in the VIP suite, Florence Okiki, the graceful wife of a billionaire architect, clung to her husband's hand, her hair plastered to her brow. The other, Ngozi, a quiet girl whose only companion was her mother, wrung the sheets and bit back her pain. She had no business being in the VIP ward, but the lack of space and urgency of her situation had made the nurses on duty bring her to the VIP ward. Both labored for hours, fighting the storm inside and out, until finally two babies cried into the world only minutes apart, a girl and a boy. The light in the clinic immediately went off. "Why is the backup generator not coming on?" the doctor shouted. "We need light here." The nurses present brought out their phone while Nurse Rebecca collected the children. Little did they know that she had swapped the babies before handing them to their mothers. But that night, when the new fathers celebrated with drinks and soft prayers, when the nurses congratulated each other on another smooth delivery, little did they know that two destinies had been swapped. Nurse Rebecca's heart thumped as she wheeled the two newborns into the quiet nursery. Nobody noticed her odd little smile and the mischievous grin on her lips. Another successful swapping, she said to herself. This wasn't her first time swapping newborns, but she had never had the opportunity to do it with two different genders to avoid being caught. And not only did she swap kids with different genders this time around, but children from completely different background. A rush of excitement ran through her. This was indeed a special day. Mrs. Florence had first insisted that her gender reveal scan told her she was going to have a baby boy, but the doctor on duty had told her that they weren't always 100% accurate, while Ngozi on her part, who had opted to not know the sex of her baby, had opened her arms to receive the baby boy she was handed. Nurse Rebecca had always told herself it was a harmless thrill. After all, babies never remember their first days, do they? 18 years later, the story of Cynthia Okeke and Ikenna Chukwuma began, for all the world to see, as an ordinary one. Both children grew up in different corners of Lagos, their lives shaped by the families that raised them. Cynthia, raised as the cherished only daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Okeke, was everything her parents dreamed of, bright, curious, and fiercely independent. Her mother Florence was her world. The laughter, the Sunday shopping trips, the late-night talks over steaming cups of tea. Cynthia's father, a man with a gentle voice and tired eyes, doted on his little star. Her home was filled with books, playdates, light, and easy affection. On the other side of the city, Ikenna grew up under the watchful gaze of Ngozi and her mother, Mama Grace. They were not wealthy, but what they lacked in cash, they made up for in warmth. Ikenna was their miracle boy, quick-witted, responsible beyond his years, his mother's pride and his grandmother's comfort. He learned early that life was not always fair, but that hard work and kindness could open almost any door. Both were ordinary, and yet not. Both carried the invisible weight of a night neither could remember. It was in the sprawling lecture halls of Victoria University, a prestigious private university on the island, that fate would begin to tighten its web. Cynthia, newly admitted to study mass communication, walked with the confident stride of someone who had been told all her life that the world belonged to her. Ikenna, on the other hand, was there on a partial scholarship for engineering. He moved with quieter energy, earnest, focused, but always with a smile for anyone who needed it. The two met over a shared group assignment in their general studies class. Cynthia, impatient with her group's disorganization, took charge, giving everyone direction on what to do and when to turn their work in. Ikenna, on his own part, sat in a corner watching her and wondering how someone could be so outspoken, fearless and yet soft in her approach. He offered suggestions when he could, but did more of listening than talking in the group. It was Cynthia who first noticed him. "He doesn't talk much, but when he does, everyone listens," she told her roommate one evening, her voice teasing, but her eyes soft with curiosity. Ikenna, on his part, found himself talking to his roommate about Cynthia. "She's fierce," he admitted to his friend Chucks, "but she's not arrogant. She actually cares about the work." They didn't become friends instantly. Like the best stories, it was a slow burn. Study sessions that ran late, inside jokes over suya and coke from the campus kiosk, the occasional clash of opinions. Sometimes they disagreed so passionately that the rest of the group would glance nervously between them, unsure if they were fighting or flirting. One evening, after yet another long study session, rain began to fall. Lagos rain, unpredictable, wild, just like the one that fell on the night they came into the world. They ran together to the hostel, Cynthia holding her file over her head, laughing as she splashed through puddles. Ikenna, usually so careful, gave up trying to stay dry. By the time they reached shelter, they were both soaked, breathless, and grinning like children. In that moment, something shifted. A glance lingered a second too long. Cynthia's cheeks flushed, and she looked away shyly. Ikenna's voice was gentle. "You know you're different from anyone I've met." Cynthia smiled. "You too. You actually listen and you see me unlike others who consider me arrogant just because I am outspoken." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of group work, late-night phone calls, and shared meals. Everyone on their floor could see it. The way Cynthia would search for Ikenna's face in a crowded hall, the way he would light up when she entered a room. One afternoon, sitting under the big mango tree beside the university library, Cynthia confessed, almost in a whisper, "Sometimes I feel like I've known you all my life." Ikenna's smile was soft, uncertain. "Me too. Strange, right?" Their hands brushed, lingered, and then finally fingers entwined. The world seemed to pause. Cynthia moved closer and rested her head on Ikenna's shoulder as they both took in the moment. But beneath the blushes and laughter, fate was stirring. Something about Ikenna nagged at Mrs. Florence Okiki when Cynthia first showed her his picture during a mid-semester break. There was something in the shape of his jaw, the tilt of his smile, something that pulled at old memories. But Florence couldn't quite put her finger on it. At night, Florence would sometimes wake from restless dreams, haunted by the echo of a crying baby in a hospital nursery. She would brush off the feeling as paranoia. After all, the past was the past. Her Cynthia was her Cynthia. But something was coming. The old web spun on that rainy night at Oasis Medical Center was about to unravel. And Nurse Rebecca, after 2 decades of impunity, was about to face her reckoning. The semester rolled on, and with it, the campus of Victoria University bloomed into its usual chaos. Assignments, elections, whispered rumors, and fleeting crushes. For Cynthia and Ikenna, the world shrank and expanded all at once. Their friendship was the sort that left even the most skeptical classmates with secret smiles. People watched them from afar, whispered about their closeness, and tried to guess how soon best friends would turn into something more. Yet, if you asked Cynthia, she would claim she wasn't in a hurry. After all, university love was like Lagos traffic, unpredictable, sometimes thrilling, sometimes exhausting. She loved the way Ikenna made her laugh, the gentle way he listened, the quiet determination in his eyes. She loved that he never tried to impress her. He simply was himself. One Saturday evening, as dusk painted the sky in streaks of gold, Cynthia found herself on the rooftop terrace of her hostel, her head on Ikenna's shoulder. They watched the distant city lights flicker to life, the gentle hum of life in the air. "Ikenna," she murmured, "do you ever wonder why we met?" He smiled, not moving his head. "Sometimes I think life just lines things up for us, like 2 parallel lines that suddenly decide to meet." Cynthia smiled back, eyes fluttering closed. "I hope we don't become parallel lines again," he laughed, squeezing her hand. "I promise. I'll always find you, even in the next life." It was during the semester break that Florence Okiki's unease began to build. When Cynthia announced she would bring a friend home for the weekend, Florence agreed with little thought. She trusted her daughter. But when she opened the door to find Ikenna standing beside Cynthia, backpack slung over one shoulder, polite smile in place, Florence felt the world tilt. He was polite, warm, and thoughtful. He offered to help in the kitchen, washed up without being asked, even charmed her husband with his knowledge of football. But there was something about the set of his jaw, the spark in his eyes. It was unsettling. Florence found herself staring at him, her mind spinning. He looked familiar, almost painfully so, but she couldn't place it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Florence sat at the dining table, her tea growing cold. She searched through old family photos, hoping to find an answer. The more she looked, the more unsettled she became. The next morning, she pulled out a faded photograph from Cynthia's first birthday. In the background, a nurse in a crisp white uniform stood by, her face half turned to the camera. Florence traced her finger over the image, her heart racing. It was even a miracle that she was in the picture. Cynthia has had some developmental issue growing up that has required the hospital to assign a private nurse to them. She would have to dig deeper. Back on campus, Cynthia and Ikenna found comfort in each other. They grew bolder in their affection, no longer hiding from their friends or themselves. On one lazy Sunday afternoon, they laid on the grass beneath the mango tree, with their books pushed to a corner. "Ikenna," Cynthia whispered, "what's your biggest fear?" He turned to look at her, the sun casting golden halos around her curls. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she blushed. "Okay, now to my biggest fear, that would be losing the people I love, or becoming someone I don't recognize," he said. She nodded, thoughtful. "Sometimes I'm scared I'm not living the life I'm supposed to. Like I was meant for something else. Somewhere else." He reached out, tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I think we find our purpose as life goes on, a little here and a little there, till we are able to fit in the puzzles." "Let's get back to our book," Biko Ikenna said finally. Meanwhile, Florence's curiosity became obsession. She visited Oasis Medical Center, requesting old records from 20 years ago. The admin staff was hesitant, but Florence pressed on, her determination unwavering. She finally managed to view the birth register and photographs of staff on duty the night Cynthia was born. There it was, the same woman in the old photo, Nurse Rebecca. Florence's heart raced as she jotted down details, piecing together a puzzle she hadn't even known existed. At home, she compared the photos, Nurse Rebecca's sharp features, her distant eyes, but it was Ikenna's resemblance to her husband that haunted her most. There was no denying it, the dimple, the smile, even the arch of his brow. She decided to talk to her husband. That night, as the city outside faded into darkness, Florence sat beside her husband and showed him the photographs. "Do you see it?" she whispered. He stared at the photo, eyes widening. "That boy, he looks just like me." A chill swept through the room. The Okekis were not people given to wild suspicions, but Florence's growing certainty unsettled them both. They decided quietly to ask Cynthia if she would be willing to take a DNA test, and also ask if Ikenna would be interested in taking one. Cynthia was confused at first. A DNA test? What for? There is nothing to be worried about, her father had told her. Your mom and I just need to confirm some things. When she told Ikenna, he was surprised, but also oddly accepting. My mother always told me I was a miracle, he laughed. Maybe I'm just about to find out why. The samples were collected, sent off, and the waiting began. A silent, tense week in which Cynthia and Ikenna held hands a little tighter, their laughter quieter, their eyes searching for answers in each other's faces. For Nurse Rebecca, the past 20 years had been a blur of uniforms, hospital corridors, and secrets buried deep. She had always believed herself too clever to be caught. But lately, rumors had started to spread. A new hospital administrator was reviewing old records and questions were being asked. One afternoon, she noticed Florence in the lobby, speaking to the admin staff. Panic fluttered in her chest. She remembered Florence, the woman who insisted on her child being a male, and also the woman she was assigned to look after her daughter for some months. She also remembered the thrill of that long-ago night, the satisfaction of a secret no one else would ever know. But now it looks the past was clawing its way to the surface. On campus, Cynthia and Ikenna grew restless. The tension was palpable, even as they tried to focus on their exams. One evening, after a long study session, Cynthia burst into tears. Ikenna pulled her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed. "I'm scared, Ikenna. What if we're not who we think we are?" He stroked her hair, his voice soft. "No matter what the DNA says, you're still Cynthia. You're still the girl I fell in love with. That won't change." She clung to him, drawing strength from his steadiness. It was a lesson in love, real love, the kind that survives storms and doubts. The envelope arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Florence called Cynthia home, her hands shaking as she opened the results. She read the words once, twice, 3 times. It was true. Cynthia was not their biological daughter. A second test with Ikenna confirmed what Florence feared. Ikenna was their son. The room was silent, the air heavy with shock. Cynthia sat quietly, her hands clenched in her lap. Ikenna stared at the wall, his mind racing. The world they knew had shifted forever. Florence kept staring at the letter in her hands with tears streaming down her face. She wept, not for herself, but for the years lost, the love that had been misplaced, the lives so carelessly thrown into chaos. But in that moment, both families were about to learn something precious. Love is not blood, but choice. And sometimes the bonds we build are stronger than any accident of fate. The Okikis reached out to Ngozi and Mama Grace, the women who had raised Ikenna with so much devotion. There were no accusations, only tears and hugs and promises that no child would be abandoned. Florence sat with Cynthia that night, stroking her hair as she cried. "You will always be my daughter," she whispered. "Nothing will change that." In his own home, Ikenna found himself sitting with Ngozi, who pulled him close and whispered, "You are always my son, even if the world says otherwise." The two families agreed to move forward together, to heal the wounds of the past with honesty and kindness. But there was one piece left, the woman who had started it all. Florence was not one to let injustice rest. Armed with evidence, photographs, and the hospital's own records, she filed a formal complaint. The hospital opened an investigation, and suddenly Nurse Rebecca found herself called to account. She tried to deny it at first, claimed innocence, blamed faulty memory. But the evidence was overwhelming. Birth registers, witness statements, even old CCTV footage. The truth, once unearthed, was impossible to bury again. It was like Nemesis had finally caught up with her. The hospital management, desperate to save face, turned the case and Nurse Rebecca over to the police. As the semester drew to a close, Cynthia and Ikenna sat together beneath the mango tree, their hands entwined, their future uncertain but hopeful. "We're not who we thought we were," Cynthia whispered, "but maybe that's okay." Ikenna squeezed her hand. "It just means we get to write our own story." They smiled, their love undiminished, even as the world shifted beneath their feet. For in the end, the greatest lesson was this: family is not defined by blood alone, but by the choices we make, the love we give, and the courage to face the truth, even when it hurts. And as night settled over the campus, the two sat in silence, their hearts at peace, their story only just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the news of the baby swap broke over the city like a thunderstorm. It started with a few whispers in the hospital corridors, then spilled into the street, gathering speed like floodwater in rainy season. Before they knew it, local blogs and social media were already abuzz with rumors. Swapped at birth, promising university students caught in hospital scandal. Evil nurse behind bars? For Cynthia and Ikenna, the world they once knew became a glass box. Friends watched them, professors whispered, and even strangers stared in public places. The story was everywhere, on phones, in newspapers, and in the voices of taxi drivers and market women alike. Yet, within the eye of the storm, they clung to each other. The love that had blossomed quietly now faced a harsh, glaring spotlight. Some days it felt like the world was rooting for them. Other days it felt like the whole city was waiting for their downfall. Victoria University's campus buzzed with reporters and curious students. Cynthia, once an ordinary face on the quad, was now a headline. "How does it feel?" a reporter asked as she walked from class one afternoon, cameras flashing. She paused, shoulders back, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "It feels unreal. But I'm still me. I'm still Cynthia." Ikenna, for his part, tried to keep his head down. He avoided the press, but when a journalist caught up with him near the engineering lab, he stopped and faced her. "Are you and Cynthia still together? Knowing what you know?" she pressed. He looked past the camera, searching for the right words. Love isn't always about what's easy. Sometimes it's about holding on, even when everything else falls apart. The answer swept across social media. Hashtags trended. Debates raged. Was it right for two people, once strangers but now revealed to be raised in each other's families, to remain together? Was love strong enough to survive this? Florence, who had always shielded her daughter from the harshest storms, now found herself at the center of a media hurricane. She gave only one interview, her words careful but fierce. "Cynthia is my daughter in every way that matters. I love her, and I will stand by her, no matter what." Across town, Ngozi and Mama Grace braced themselves for judgment, for sympathy, for prying questions about motherhood and loss. But they held their heads high. One Sunday afternoon, the two families met, not as adversaries, but as survivors of the same storm. There were tears, apologies, and hesitant laughter as they tried to bridge the years that had been lost. Florence hugged Ngozi tightly. "No child will be lost again," she promised. Ikenna and Cynthia watched their mothers, their eyes shining with a new understanding. In a world that measured love by DNA and law, here were two women proving that love could defy biology. Meanwhile, Nurse Rebecca sat in the sterile chill of a police interrogation room, the sharp fluorescent lights exposing every line on her face. She looked smaller now, stripped of her power, her composure slipping away. A detective sat across from her, voice patient but cold. "Why did you do it?" Rebecca stared at her hands, knuckles white. "At first it was a joke, just a way to feel important. I didn't think it would ever matter. But then, every year, I wondered if someone would find out. I suppose I wanted to see if I could get away with it." The detective shook his head. "And what about the lives you destroyed?" Rebecca's eyes darted up, desperate, pleading. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt." But the law was not interested in her regrets. The evidence was clear. The falsified wrist tags, the tampered records, the testimonies of staff who'd always found Rebecca strange. In the end, she was led away in handcuffs. Her reign of quiet terror finally ended. For Cynthia and Ikenna, justice was bittersweet. Nothing could return the lost years, but the knowledge that Rebecca would never harm another family was a small comfort. On campus, Cynthia and Ikenna faced a new challenge. It was not the scrutiny from strangers that hurt the most, but the uncertain looks from friends, the whispered, "How can they?" in hallways and cafeterias. One afternoon, Cynthia found herself cornered by a group of classmates. One, bold and careless, asked, "So you're really staying together? Isn't it weird now that you know everything?" Cynthia straightened, her face calm but her eyes burning. "It's only weird if you let it be. We're not related. We grew up as strangers, found each other, and fell in love. What happened to us could have happened to anyone." Another classmate, quieter, offered a gentle smile. "I think it's brave to keep loving each other after all this." The campus slowly adjusted. In time, the rumors faded. Some people would never understand, but most did what people do. They moved on, leaving Cynthia and Ikenna to rebuild in peace. One Friday evening, the two families gathered at Cynthia's home for a quiet dinner. It was awkward at first, everyone unsure of the new rules, the new relationships. But as the night wore on, laughter returned. Cynthia's father told old jokes. Mama Grace made her famous pepper soup, and even Florence smiled as the children swapped stories of their childhoods, stories that now belong to both families. After dinner, Cynthia slipped onto the balcony, Ikenna following her into the cool night air. "Do you ever wish things had stayed the same?" she asked quietly. He leaned on the railing beside her, looking out over the city. "Sometimes. But then I remember all of this, the pain, the confusion. It brought us here. I wouldn't trade that. Not for anything." She leaned her head on his shoulder, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "Me neither." They stood in silence, holding on to each other with the city lights stretching endlessly before them. And for the first time in weeks, the future felt open again. The day Nurse Rebecca was brought to court, journalists crowded the steps, their flashes turning morning into staccato lightning. Inside, families sat tense and silent as the charges were read aloud. Child endangerment, falsification of hospital records, and willful infliction of emotional harm. The judge, stern and clear-eyed, listened as evidence was presented. The DNA results, the testimonies of the Okikis, Ngozi, Mama Grace, and others. Rebecca's defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, but her own words from the police interviews sealed her fate. When the sentence was finally handed down, years in prison, barred from ever working in healthcare again, the city exhaled. Justice at last had been served. Florence hugged Cynthia tightly outside the courthouse. "It's over," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We can finally begin again." Through it all, Cynthia and Ikenna found themselves drawing closer, not despite the pain, but because of it. They talked for hours about fear, about identity, about the strange, fragile thread that had always connected them. In the safety of their love, they built new dreams. They talked about the future, careers, families, forgiveness. They talked about what it meant to belong, to be chosen, not just by birth, but by love. Ikenna, always steady, always patient, told her, "I think we're proof that love can survive anything, even the worst of storms." Cynthia smiled, tears in her eyes. "We didn't choose how we started, but we get to choose what happens next." By the end of the semester, the whispers faded. Cynthia and Ikenna were no longer headlines. They were simply two students in love, dreaming of the future. Graduation approached, and as they stood side by side in their caps and gowns, parents cheering, the lessons of their journey felt clear and strong. Family, they realized, was not defined by blood, but by love, forgiveness, and the courage to face the truth. And in that truth, they found peace, not because the world had become easier, but because they had chosen, again and again, to hold on to each other. Time has always moved on, quietly, relentlessly, healing wounds in places no hand could reach. In the months after the trial, life slowly found a new rhythm for the Okikis and the Chukwumas. The two families, once strangers, now shared meals, laughter, and even the little annoyances that come with real closeness. Cynthia and Ikenna, who had once felt lost in the world, now walked it with a sense of belonging, as if fate itself had given them another chance. The city too forgot. Stories faded from the news, faces and names replaced by new scandals, new triumphs, new heartbreaks. Yet within the homes that bore the weight of those headlines, the lesson endured. The truest family is made not by chance, but by courage and love. Graduation was a blur of caps tossed skyward and promises shouted into the air. Ikenna, ever the planner, had waited until the excitement faded before making his move. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped over the lagoon and the city glowed with the promise of night, he led Cynthia to the little garden behind her family's house. There, surrounded by fairy lights strung through the bougainvillea, he knelt, heart pounding. "Cynthia, we've been through storms I never imagined, but loving you has been the easiest thing in my life. Will you marry me and build something new with me? A story that's ours alone?" Cynthia's answer was a laugh, a cry, and then a resounding yes. The families celebrated as one, their joy ringing out into the Lagos night. The wedding was a celebration not just of love, but of survival, of forgiveness, second chances, in the power of truth. There was no need for grandeur. What mattered was the gathering of both families, side by side, no longer bound by old wounds. Florence stood beside Ngozi as Cynthia prepared. They helped pin her veil, their hands trembling with happiness. "I have two mothers," Cynthia said softly. Tears brightened her eyes. "And today, both will walk me down the aisle." The ceremony was simple, heartfelt. Ikenna's eyes shone as Cynthia joined him, both mothers at her side. When the vows were spoken, not a single eye was dry. The past was acknowledged, not erased. Its pain transformed into something beautiful. At the reception, laughter echoed as families mingled. Florence sharing a dance with Mama Grace, Cynthia's father raising a toast with Ikenna's uncles. Even friends who once doubted now cheered, swept up in the joy of a love that had conquered so much. In the weeks that followed, Cynthia and Ikenna made a decision. The pain and noise of the city had faded, but they wanted to begin life on a page unmarked by old shadows. With blessings from both families, they applied for jobs and scholarships abroad, choosing a country where neither had roots, a place where they could plant their own. It was not an easy move. The goodbyes were long, filled with promises and tears and laughter. Florence and Ngozi both pressed keepsakes into Cynthia's hand, letters, jewelry, photographs, reminders that no ocean could diminish love. Ikenna's mother, Mama Grace, hugged him fiercely. "No matter where you go, remember who you are. Family is the people who hold your heart, not the place where you were born." At the airport, both families stood together, waving as Cynthia and Ikenna disappeared through the gates, luggage in hand and hope in their eyes. Their new city was both strange and beautiful, cold in winter, blooming in spring, its streets humming in languages they barely understood. But together, Cynthia and Ikenna carved out a life. There were challenges, loneliness, culture shock, moments of doubt. But in each other, they found the courage to begin again. Their tiny apartment filled with music and warmth, with video calls to home and recipes carried across continents. And as the years passed, they built a family not just of blood, but of choice, friends from all over the world, a community stitched together by kindness. Each year on their birthday anniversary, they called both parents. There were always two cakes, one for the mother who raised and one for the mother who lost and found again. Sometimes when Cynthia looked back, she marveled at the path that led her here. The chaos of a hospital nursery, the pain of discovery, the storm of public attention, and finally, the quiet miracle of forgiveness. She knew, now more than ever, that identity was not a single thread, but a tapestry woven by many hands. Ikenna too understood. Home isn't a place, he would say. It's the people you choose to walk beside, no matter where you are in the world. And so the story that began with cruelty and confusion ended in hope, a reminder that even in a world broken by secrets, love can piece together something stronger than fate. Years later, as Cynthia and Ikenna strolled hand in hand through a foreign park, they smiled at the sound of laughter echoing from a nearby playground. Their own children ran ahead, voices bright, unaware of the journey that had brought them here. Behind them, the memories of two families lingered, Florence and Ngozi, Mama Grace and Cynthia's father, always just a call away, always present in the quiet moments, always family. The past was not forgotten, but in this new land, on this fresh page, Cynthia and Ikenna had learned to write their own story, one of courage, forgiveness, and love that crossed oceans and erased every old line. And so, surrounded by the love that had saved them, they began again, together.